Today's TXWaterpolo Pod Special features the entirety of Joe's conversation with George Block, the godfather of San Antonio Aquatics. The Texas Swimming and Diving Hall of Fame inductee is renowned throughout the state for successes in swimming, but for water polo fans, he was the driving force behind the huge success of the sport in that area beginning in the early 80s. He and Joe talk about the rise and fall of water polo and expectations for its revival as it becomes a UIL sport. So here's George Block.
Welcome to today's podcast talk with George Block. George Block is basically the godfather of aquatics in San Antonio. He coached at Alma Heights. He was the aquatics director at Northside ISD. He has a pool named after him. He was also the head coach for Quad A 4, I think. He was my head coach, for my club. So he's also been on the boards of ASCA and USA Swimming and USA Water Polo. George, thank you so much for doing this. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Happy to watch you succeed. I
don't know if I've succeeded at all. I am in the sport of water polo, and I wish every day that, why don't I coach golf or basketball or football? But I fell in love with water polo at age 9 or 10 in Whispering Oaks in San Antonio. So I love what I do, and it's a whole lot of fun. So what are you doing nowadays?
I'm mostly retired, and I'm still doing a lot on nonprofit boards with swimming and just in the community at large.
Okay, good. And how are you doing with the whole COVID-19?
We sequestered in place in South Padre Island.
Not a bad place to sequester.
We figured if we're going to be in prison, that's a real nice prison.
Okay, there you go. And I'm sure you got out and kind of walked the beach a little bit here with your mask on.
Got 4.5 miles of walking in every day, and I brought a TRX down to do some strength work, and we read a lot and ate too much.
Read a lot and ate too much. Yes. Was it? My wife and I tend to eat out kind of way too much. So the whole COVID thing is we did a lot more dishes.
Yeah.
But no, it's I'm glad that we're opening up now and pools are becoming a little bit more kind of available, and swim programs and in water programs are starting back up. So we'll see how that goes kind of moving forward.
Yep.
Yeah. Just pending like an additional peak or something, which we hope does not happen. So
it's already happening. So
I know. Yeah. Was it? So, all right. I just said that you're the godfather of aquatics in San Antonio. So you started at Alma Heights.
Yes, sir.
And you brought water polo with you. So just tell us about that. You started in 1973. Go.
That was my first job. I was a pentathlete at Fort Sam Houston at the time, and the coach at Alma Heights was Pete Williams. And he asked myself and another guy, Tim Henrich, who you may remember as Torque, if we would come and coach water polo. And we went, okay. But he handed us sheet of rules, and they were using a volleyball, and you scored a goal if you got it between the ladders on either side of the pool.
You got to start somewhere. You have to start somewhere.
It was sort of mall ball. And we did that for a year and said, look, if we're going to do this again, we want to do it right and really coach water polo. And, I said, I think it makes for bad culture on the team if part of your program is deliberately half-assed. If you're not going to do it right and it doesn't matter, don't do it.
You're preaching the choir, my friend. You're preaching the choir.
So we said we're going to do it right from that point. And so the next year we started the high school team and a club team to support it.
Nice. Like a club water polo team or a club like an aquatic swimming and club team?
It was all of the above. All the swimmers played water polo and all the water polo players swam. But you had to, in order to have insurance, you got to register with water polo.
Of course. So now tell us a little bit about those early state high school kind of championships. I know Fosdick was involved at a certain level. It was kind of Wild Wild West days.
Well, it was very Wild West because it wasn't run by an organization, by TISCA or by the UIL. It was run by FOS. And So, in some ways it made it crazy. In other ways, he made it happen. So, you can't bitch about it too much, because if it wasn't for him, it wouldn't be there now.
No, again, of course.
But we would definitely do things like show up at state, and he would hand us a new set of rules or new set of interpretations, 30 minutes before the first game, that he had just got out in California at a college tournament they were at. And so we'd have played the entire season under one set of rules and one set of interpretations. And then 30 minutes before the first game, we were all given a new set of rules and a new set of interpretations.
So, you were coaching kind of the Alma Heights team. Who were some of the other team and rivalries at the time in San Antonio, or
there were no other teams in San Antonio?
No other teams.
When we would do tournaments, we would typically split our high school team a couple of different ways, and our club team, we'd invite a lot of private schools up from Mexico. St. Mark's almost always would come down from Dallas. We had a real good relationship with St. Mark's. And every now and then, not very often, a team would come over from Houston, but they didn't need to, because even back then they had plenty of competition. And so it was really St. Mark's, us, and some Mexican teams.
Okay. Well, you got to play kind of who you got to play. And kind of one of the best things that I think happened in Texas, that it took California until the mid-90s, was there was a girls water polo in the 70s. It started in the 70s. A championship started in the late 70s. And I thought that was great.
It was from day one was women's. There was never any difference. They were on different weekends, the state. And so then the season went the same way. You'd have a boys weekend, a girls weekend, a boys weekend, a girls weekend, a boys weekend, a girls weekend, then, girls state, boys state, all the way through. And so I never experienced it from 1973 forward where there wasn't a girls water polo championship that was on a par with the guys.
Well, yeah. I tell this, and I don't make it a secret. I would much rather coach a bunch of 18, 16 and under girls than a bunch of 18, 16 and under boys. Because they listen better. They understand the little things, and boys are off the reservation at that age, as I was as well. So,
yeah.
You coached a lot of people that were off the reservation. I don't think I was as bad as some people, but I am sure you can share a story or two right now.
The territory at that age.
Yes, there you go. And then you won 2 championships. Like, you won boys and girls in 1979, right?
Well,
were you there, or had you already moved to Northside at that point?
No, I was at Northside. It was kids that I had coached that won. But I came over, my last year at Alamo Heights was 77.
Okay. So what made you kind of do that transition? I know you became the aquatics director over at kind of Northside. So just tell me what was just inviting about it.
Was water polo was a big part of it, is that I knew that if I came, we could immediately expand water polo in the city. Mm-hmm. And if I didn't, there was probably a 90% chance that it wouldn't.
Yep.
And so I came over. It was sort of, at the time, it was a lateral move, because, when we brought kids into the pool, we brought them in, sat them in the bleachers, and said, we're going to have the tryouts in the deep end. The people look panicked and said, or you can go into the shallow end, whatever you want. And anybody who went to the shallow end, we put on the novice team, and anybody who went to the deep end, we put on the age group team.
You got to, hey, you don't have a whole lot of time. You got to do what you got to do, in those short amount of time.
Pretty primitive at the start. In fact, the truth is, the only reason I got that job is they had offered it to a bunch of really top coaches, and they came down and said, you got no team, you got nobody out here, you got no summer league feeders, you got nothing. No. And so, they ran out of really good coaches to bring in, so they got me.
So water polo kind of was a big part of that kind of transition.
It was a huge part of it at the time.
And you brought it from Alma Heights, and obviously you probably also built the summer league swim systems and stuff, because that's what I grew up in, and that was early 80s whenever I started.
All that stuff.
And
my last year at Heights, we won state, and then both boys and girls won it 2 years later. But because we had it sort of established, we'd already won one, then Heights was always going to hire a good water polo coach. And they've done that. They've always hired a good water polo coach.
Yeah. And I mean, then you moved to Northside, and the swimming just excelled, obviously, but right. This is the water polo podcast. So, but basically, I know they're the Houston teams, and they kind of dominated, the 70s. And then Alamo Heights kind of, started doing well. But then the Northside teams just dominated the 80s. Just tell us about about some of the good programs, the good coaches.
So the pool opened in February of 78. So with like a week to go in the high school season, the pool opened.
That's okay.
Yeah, we didn't care. It finally opened.
I'm sure it was supposed to open in September. So there you go.
Yeah, and I had that year I had Holmes at Alamo Heights, I had Marshall at Northeast, and I had Jay at Lackland. So I just drove around to different practices.
That's okay. And so were you the head coach for all of them?
For all of them that first year.
Oh, geez. There you go.
But the district was really committed to doing it right. Partly because back then, building what then was a large natatorium was really controversial. And the real reason they built it wasn't for competitive swimming. It was, and you can sort of think about many drives to the pool. There's so many drainage ditches in Northside that every time it rained, kids would drown. And
okay.
What they wanted was swim lessons and what they called drown proofing. And so every child in third grade came through the pool for 2 weeks of swim lessons, just to get exposed to water and, teach them as much as we could and teach them safety and, push off the bottom, roll on your back, call for help, all that stuff. That was the big driver. But the second is they wanted to succeed athletically. So when we started, I was able to hire a coach for boys and girls at each high school. And so the first decade, we had a boys coach and a girls coach at each high school. And so that meant that the boys teams and girls teams got a lot of attention.
Yep.
Even if they, the boys were in the practice or in the water practice, the girls would be outside stepping through it, run through it on dry land, sort of playing like team handball type water polo outside,
just kind of rotating the groups in and out.
Offensive concepts, the same as you experience morning and afternoon. But if the girls were or the boys were in the morning, then the girls were outside doing sort of team handballish water polo outside.
Now, but didn't you have some coaches that coached both boys and girls at the same high school?
Well, one of the things that was going on in the state at that time was that was really the beginning of the budget cuts to education that went on for about 20 years. And when we got to a certain point, when coach would leave, I couldn't replace him, and we had to combine teams. And so we sort of gradually went from having a boys coach and a girls coach to just one coach at each school.
Yeah, because I know I was very young at the time, but I remember, I think Mark Elliott Clark, I know Doug Andrew at Marshall, I think they coached both.
Like when Mark was the boys coach at Clark, Scott Zielinski was the girls coach.
Okay.
So, sort of the way that went. But when Scott left, I couldn't replace him. Then Mark became both.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. I thank you so much for bringing water polo to Northside. There was obviously, I remember as a young pup kind of going to the games, and my older brother was playing. It was great. It was great to watch the games. And and then we traveled to Houston for the state championship, or the state championship kind of wasn't in San Antonio. So, are there any players that kind of stick out from that time frame or that era from the Marshall, Clarks, Jay?
Well, so like if I go way back into Alamo Heights, I think the two best players that come out of there, boys, were Pat McCullough and Tilden Schaefer. And Pat went out to UOP and played, and has never moved back. He's a geologist out in California now.
A lot of people don't move back, although a lot of people are moving back or just moving from California to here.
Yeah, moving from. And Tilden went to Brown and played 4 years out there, and then he ran for district attorney here in San Antonio this year. But those two, when we had the club team at Heights, they started playing together from the time they were 8 till the time they were 18. And they were just like radar by their senior year. That might have been the weakest Heights team, but those two were so good, they made it all the way to the state final.
It doesn't shock me at all.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't take a whole lot to be good in high school sometimes. You have 2-3 good dominant players that have been playing together for a long time. It's still the same way. So
yeah. And then if I sort of go, the top goalie from Heights was a guy named Andy Gates. I guess from water polo you may know him. He's a referee now out in California.
I've heard of Andy, yes.
Does a lot of
and I think I've had a beer with Andy, but
he coached high school for years and years and years out there, and now he's retired from high school, but doing a lot of college reffing.
On the dark side, but that's okay. I'm just playing all those referees that are listening. I ref too, so it's okay.
The top players, one of the guy who was a freshman, the transition year from Heights to Northside, was Terry Vetters.
Ah, yeah, Terry. Here you go.
And he went out and played college in California and made the national junior team back then. And the national junior team coach said he was the best defensive player on the whole national junior team. And so, he was, in high school, a real force to be reckoned with. Girls around that time, Valerie Dominguez, who then became Valerie Bean and now is Valerie Martin. She was, she made the junior team and then national B. So she was quite a force. On her team was Terry's sister, Mary Ellen Vetters, who played 4 years at Stanford.
Yep.
So she was really solid. Sort of going to your era, probably the best goalie ever at Northside was David Proft, but he just hated being a goalie.
Yeah, exactly. But who does like being goalies except for true goalies? So
yeah, and he had all the skill set and the body and everything for it. He was just amazing. But after about 1.5 years, 2 years, he said, "No, I got to get out on the field. I want to score. I want to shoot."
Yeah, he could also swim a little bit too. So there you go. Plus, he just has this huge torso, the long arms.
Yeah, he could egg beater out to his knees and all that stuff.
And Dave still plays. Still plays. So he still plays for a club called Totex up in Austin. So he's done well for himself.
And then in that era just before that were guys like Cy Wintery, who ended up being captain at Air Force Academy. Ellis Eaton ended up being captain at Air Force Academy. We've had a lot of players do really well at the academies, Air Force, Navy. Did really well in those environments.
Yeah, we even had like my older brother who wasn't necessarily a standout on kind of some of those Clark teams, but also Chris Olvera from the Marshall and Clark teams kind of back in the days. So I mean, there are a ton of kids, and they kept being competitive all the way up through the end of the 90s, like the 80s and 90s. But then kind of Houston started kind of rising a little bit at the end of the 80s and early 90s. So
a lot of that was demographics. Houston boomed with suburban growth at that time.
Yep.
I mean, from living there, it used to be a schlep out to Woodlands. Now it's just suburb. Same thing from Katy.
It's still a schlep, though.
Yeah, it's still a schlep. And Katy used to be way outside of Houston, and now it's just constant.
Yeah.
So there was this massive
urban sprawl,
and affluent urban sprawl, and pool building urban sprawl.
Yeah.
And Houston had been sort of cloud seeded with some pretty darn good coaches and players. You talked about earlier, we were just BS and we were talking about, Clear Lake back in the day. Lanny Landtroop had a hell of a program at Clear Lake, and those guys could really play and they could really swim. And so there were a lot of guys who they just had a lot of potential coaches. They had a lot of good players. They had a lot of good coaches. And so it wasn't too surprising to see it sprawl. So, a guy who was sort of the godfather of swimming up in New Braunfels, and he gave me a lesson in humility one time and said, don't get really carried away. You're a really great coach. It's all demographics. And he pulled out his computer program and showed demographics all over the country, and where the Reds lit up, it was just great swimming all over the country.
It is, yeah, it is definitely true. But some of those great San Antonio teams, so what did they have that was better besides demographics? That was better than like the Houston teams. I know they could swim, and I know that they had the fall season, they had the spring season. There was an age group program. So, you had built that up.
We did all that. We had, the sort of the real fall season and a little short spring season. We'd always do a clinic every year. You remember the Fiesta Water Polo clinics that we always did?
Of course.
So we brought in a good California coach to keep us current so that we wouldn't get stagnant just with ourselves, which I think would be really easy to do in that environment. We had really good coaches, either from really good polo coaching backgrounds, like Kurt Swanson, hopefully his Holmes team that was undefeated would be one of the all-time teams.
They were in the best of Texas in the top 16. So
I think the closest game they had all season was 10 or 11 points. Don Boyd came in with a lot of coaching experience. We had a guy at Marshall named Mike Phelps who had played high school in California at a pretty high level and then swam at Indiana. Debbie Starr played college at A&M. So we had a lot of experience, a lot of good coaches, and that created just a lot of having everybody in one pool is sort of a disadvantage. The advantage is it makes it almost like a university academic department. There's so much sharing of ideas, and we had a guy from Michigan named Tom Topolsky who was just a freaking genius, and especially a genius at coaching girls. And he came up with some sort of, the ways to train girls to shoot so they wouldn't shoot like a girl, and some exercises.
Can't say that anymore, Coach. You can't say that. So there you go.
Yeah, but I just did. So you can edit that out. But he had all sorts of great ways to just develop some really good women shooters. And he was just brilliant, and the girls really responded to that. And so I think a lot of the magic was just having all those really good coaches in one room watching what each other was doing and sharing ideas.
Yeah. And and as we know, sometimes coaches get a little bit too protective of their stuff and they don't want to share. And I remember, Clark I went to Clark. So Clark is practicing and the Marshall is practicing, the coaches are talking and they're sharing different things, but then we play to try to go to state the next weekend, so
exactly.
I do remember. And you mentioned Debbie Starr. I remember Debbie Starr was my age group coach in 6th grade. My age group coach in 6th grade. But I do remember that, I don't know if it was going into my 8th grade year, but that the age group team was stopped.
Well, there's nobody to play it after a while.
We've reached the halfway point of today's podcast, and we'll return after this.
In many podcasts, this time would be filled with ads for electric toothbrushes or recruiting services. Not here. Instead, we're asking you to show your support for TXWaterpolo by donating to it. Go to txwaterpolo.com/donate and help us continue covering the sport we love in the Lone Star State.
Hey, this is Jesse Smith, recent Pan Am gold medalist. I was just checking out Texas Water Polo from the TX Water Polo podcast. Also, you can check out their website. You can follow me at GoSmith Now. Thanks, guys.
Now, part 2 of today's show.
And at first, Heights kept their age group team going. When Paul Bergen was the head women's coach at UT, he was also in charge of Longhorn Aquatics. And so the Texas women played polo, plus all of Longhorn Aquatics played polo. And that was a huge club. And so, they could put 20 teams in the water.
Yeah.
And, we could bring up 4 teams and Heights would bring up 2. It didn't take too many programs, and you could have a pretty quality age group tournament. You could play a lot of people. But I can't remember under which coach Heights dropped, and then once Bergen left, it just sort of petered out at Longhorn. When the coaches who worked for Bergen were all gone, water polo left. And so there's just nobody left to play other than play inter-squad.
Well, you'd be happy to know we had a tournament this past January. It's called the Dare to Dream over MLK weekend. It was in Houston. We had 25 teams, all 12 and under.
Wow.
And it was I think it was 12, 13 different clubs. So, and that was up from about 9 or 10 in the previous year. So we're hoping to get that to be 30 or 40 teams here soon. So again, just kind of grow the base, right? Just grow the base and get as many kids playing as possible. And, but then, also during high school, I think that, we used to have the fall season and then also the spring season, but then, I know that they shifted the high school swimming, then the spring kind of high school season kind of went away a little bit.
I don't really know how the spring, I think when they were trying to sort of force the fall season, then the spring went away. When the UIL shifted the seasons, that really caused a lot of the sort of a mess, and not enough time for a fall season, not enough teams wanted to play in the spring.
Yep. No, but it's just, and so what we're talking about is the high school swimming state used to be the middle of March. Then it got moved up to the middle of February.
Third week of March, and now it's second week of February.
So it got moved up quite a bit earlier. So, and then that also then kind of moved up a lot of club swimming from that might have started in early May to mid-May to the beginning of April and stuff like that for long course season, stuff like that. So it just kind of shifted a lot of things. And that was one of the primary reasons if we fast forward back into late 2000s, kind of moving out of the spring and then the rise of the number of teams kind of throughout the state. So,
are you familiar with the Florida seasons, the way Florida does it?
Florida, off the top of my head, they have changed a little bit, but I believe that they play high school water polo in the spring.
Right. And what they do is they start high school swimming first day of school, or even a little bit. They start whenever football and volleyball does.
Of course. Yep.
And they have their championship right around the second weekend in December. And then they play water polo then from sort of the day after Christmas until the first weekend of spring break. And then after spring break, the water polo club kids go to their water polo, the swimming club kids go to their swimming, and everybody's doing their summer thing.
Yep.
And I think that's a really good way to do it. It creates meaningful seasons for everything and still allows time for everything. And I think if we're going to be really successful in the long term, we need to not only think about adding water polo, but creating new season structures.
Oh, really?
It's really hard in anything that you do in life to just add stuff. You also have to subtract something. You have to create room for the new thing that you're adding.
You have to adjust and adapt and such like that. So you have to move forward.
Every addition requires a subtraction. Just otherwise your life becomes too out of control. And so I think one of the things that, in terms of implementing, how do you make high school water polo real? How do you make it really succeed? How do we do this? Especially given now that there are so many combined facilities like Northside's. Houston sells a lot of single high school pools, but Dallas, I-35 corridor, San Antonio, it's all central facilities. I think we should be really looking at a version of that Florida type schedule.
Yeah. So, as I'm sure you're aware, that the UIL did this past October of 2019, October 21st at 9:35 a.m. They officially sanctioned, and I know the day and time because that was a very long process, and I'm sure that you even were involved in that process way back in the day too. So,
the process was going back on in the 70s.
Oh, I know. Yeah, and it started stop, and we finally figured out the rules of the game and started to play the game the way that UIL wanted us to play the game, and it was the first sport that was added in 20 years. The UIL decided to move the official season to the fall. It's going to start August 1, along with volleyball and football. Any thoughts on as far as the challenges, the possible, kind of success stories of the fall 2021 season?
Fall is sort of always, to me, has been the traditional season.
Yep.
That's what I grew up with as a kid doing it myself. That's what I grew up with as a coach. That's what I implemented when I came to Northside. So I'm really just comfortable with that. The downside for the fall is it is extremely discriminatory against inner city teams.
Yeah.
Because the new kids, new freshmen, are literally learning how to swim at the same time they're learning how to play water polo. And so at best, if they stick with it, because that's a pretty negative experience, their first year is their second year.
Yep.
And so the most they'll get is 3 years of experience in high school.
Yep.
Compared to 4. And I almost think, especially now, if we're not being sensitized and sensitive to stuff that's structurally discriminatory, we're really neglecting our jobs and our leadership role.
Diversity and inclusion. That is on the forefront.
And I think that is a reason that that's another reason we should consider the Florida season, is that if kids start out with a swimming season, the inner city teams have a season to teach the kids how to swim and give them a little bit of endurance. And then they can jump into water polo, that they're not hanging on lane lines and hanging on the side of the pool and all that stuff. That you're giving the urban schools a chance. And I think that's really important. And I think it's something we should be thinking about and sandpapering our consciences to make sure we're doing more than lip service.
No, and this is part of us kind of quote unquote getting ready for fall 2021.
Yeah.
Is the education aspect. It's preparing coaches, it's preparing programs, it's preparing athletic directors for this. That's going to happen, because this is the first quote unquote sport that's been added by the UIL. So a lot of people weren't around the last time, like the wrestling was added and such. Now things have been added as far as, different levels for, kind of football or, cheer or mariachi. But there's going to be some challenges. There's even going to be a little overlap with high school swimming.
Yeah.
So
a lot of overlap.
So after a couple of years, it's going to be, conversations are going to be able to be had as far as, all right, so do we need to shift this? Do we need to shift that to make it? Because I kind of see it. I mean, I've always been a believer, because I grew up in the system that we were talking about kind of earlier. I believe that, they, like, both swimming and water polo can coexist. And
not only can they coexist, they can make each other flourish.
And they can thrive. Yeah. And there have been, obviously now with the specialization of sport, there are the swim clubs that have 2 weeks off in August. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's swim. And it's the same thing for club soccer and club volleyball. It's even the same thing for club water polo to a certain extent now too. Yeah. But I do believe in the high school realm, and that water polo can help grow the numbers at the high school level for swim teams.
Yeah. And there's no question about it. I think the other thing is, as an educator, there are really significant life lessons to be learned in sport, but you can't learn all of them in an individual sport.
This is very true.
And it's the same with a team sport. There are life lessons there, but you can't learn all of them in a team sport.
No.
And so I think from an educational point of view, you want to give your aquatics athletes a team sport exposure and an individual sport exposure. And then from a the high school competitive, if the kid's a serious swimmer, it's going to be club swimming. If the kid's serious water polo, it's going to be club water polo. But at the high school level, you can do both.
I mean,
that's the beauty of it.
Yes. I would never have been a swimmer if water polo didn't get me to the pool.
Yeah.
And not that I was the greatest swimmer in the world. I was okay.
You were pretty darn good.
But compared to everybody else that was around the same time, I was okay. And but like, it was one of those things where, I've always been probably more skewed towards water polo. The opportunities.
That was your passion the day you showed up at the pool.
Yeah, I think my brother and Mark Elliott had to teach me how to dive off a block and do a flip turn before I went to my first club swim practice. So, and that was before I met Coach Debbie Starr. So it can grow. We've had so many success stories over the last 10 years. I've gone out and talked to Coach into doing water polo, and they're like, I don't know. I go, it's going to grow your numbers. And it just brings a different type of athlete to the pool that can make great sprinters. And how do you win dual meets? And how do you win state? Sprinting and relays. Yeah. So it's not rocket science.
At Alamo Heights, when we started out, we had a lot of kids that either got kicked off or dropped from the football team. They were big, strong guys with cannon arms, and at that time they could do a 25, but by the end of the season they could do a 50.
Exactly. and then after 4 years, they might be willing to do a 200. But we'll see. But no, yes, and I just see water polo being added to the UIL is just growing aquatics in general.
Yep.
And getting more people to the pool. There's a ton of multi-million-dollar facilities that have been built around the state.
Yep.
Let's use them. And they've been built by school districts.
Facilities than anywhere in the world.
Yeah, and let's use them. And it's just getting, I've had a lot of converts from swimming, and no, water polo is going to mess up your stroke. It's different strokes, and you're a good swim coach. You're just teach the kid, and they'll remember after a practice or two, and
it'll make them more coordinated.
Yeah, exactly. And but it's been great. So, have you followed high school water polo or club water polo in Texas over the last 20 years?
Obviously, over the last 20 years, over the last 10 since I've been out of it, I've sort of from arm's length. I've been just keep keep aware of it, sort of know what's going on, but I haven't really followed it tightly. I've been more frustrated at the politics of it.
Of water polo or swimming?
Both. Probably both. At times I felt like TSCA became an organization that was just a high school coaches job preservation organization rather than something that was really trying to, what is the best thing we can do for kids? And I think anytime your organization or your own personal decisions is what's best for coaches, you've lost your way. It's always what's best for kids.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm the same way. If you just make a program and you communicate, you make sure that the kids understand and they know that you care, kids are going to come in droves. And that's going to be, you're paying it forward. You learn from a good coach. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a good coach yourself. And so kind of do it for the right reasons. It's not about your personal glory or your name's in the paper. It's about the kid being like the name in the paper and such. And you were one of those coaches. Yeah. For me growing up, I would not be a coach now if it wasn't for you. And I appreciate that. Now there is, I talked about you being on boards, USA Swimming. Talk to us a little bit about the Texas Swimming and Diving and Water Polo Hall of Fame.
Well, I think that's a place where, Texas water polo or TXWaterpolo could really make a difference. Texas Swimming and Diving Hall of Fame is now has a home at the University of Texas. And if you know the University of Texas politics, getting some outside organization to have a physical presence on their campus is brutal. But they've approved it, adopted it, and we've been there for about 10 years. And it's all aquatic: swimming, diving, water polo, synchro. It's the whole nut. And obviously, we want to keep a pretty high standard because the swimming is a really high standard, diving is a really high standard. But a lot of it, water polo early on, maybe even till today, didn't have the same opportunities that exist in swimming. You know, as you know, there's hundreds of collegiate varsity swimming teams, and there's a couple of dozen collegiate varsity water polo teams. And so the opportunities haven't always been equal, but we are really trying hard to get the right coaches recognized and the right players recognized from the 70s till now. And obviously with the Hall of Fame, you want to bias towards the old guys, get them in while they're still alive, and then let the young guys just sort of fill in underneath until they become the old guys. But we are looking for nominations for coaches and for players, men, women, boys, girls, from the history of Texas water polo that we can get on the wall there at the University of Texas.
I will help you with that. We're going to get some names, and we're to use the podcast to get the word out a little bit, to get some nominations. And I do appreciate the time, Coach.
Hey, anytime. Thank you for what you're doing. You're being the Johnny Appleseed of water polo, and everything needs an evangelist. And what do evangelists do? They give the same message over and over and over until you get sick of saying it. But people need to hear the same message, and you beat the bass drum, boom, to keep everybody in step. Yeah. And you're playing that evangelist role in water polo, and I just sort of smile when I think about it, because you were that kid when you were 9 years old.
I don't remember that exactly. I just remembered I just wanted to do this, or I just wanted to pass the ball and play a little water polo.
You just wanted to get in there and get that water polo ball. As soon as you got near water, you were looking for the yellow ball.
Exactly. Just put a water polo ball at the end of my lane. I'm going to swim fast. So,
yep.
But I do appreciate it, Coach. I can't call you George. Really, it's still Coach Block. And I appreciate everything that you did. I still appreciate everything that you currently do. I think I'm not making a secret. I'm moving back down to San Antonio. I'm going to call you up. I will buy you lunch. And we will have our social distancing, of course, and
hopefully that'll be over by then.
It's going to be in like 2-3 weeks. So we will see.
But very good. Looking forward to it.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Good talking to you again.
Our thanks to George Block for his time Zooming with Joe, and thanks to you for listening and continuing to tell friends about the TX Water Polo Podcast. Until next time, so long from Austin.
Busy hanging out my thoughts to dry, 'cause I've been in the rain of my unconscious ways, trying to turn the world into a playground with all my might. Tables are turned and the ride is on the way round. Hold on tight, waiting in line, running my mind. I can't wait to get out again, counting the time, thinking of mine. Anything to get out again, waiting in line, running my mind. I can't wait to get out again, counting the time, thinking of mine. Anything to get out again, out again, out again. Anything to get out.
This has been a production of TWP Sports LLC.